that roar! It wasn't just hunger, it was the voice of death itself echoing through the wilderness. Elias, the blind YAKUT elder, felt the tremor in the air, not just from the biting 75-degree wind, but from the ice groaning beneath the 8 white colossi. His sharpened senses traced the encirclement. 1,000 reindeer trapped on the edge of the frozen lake, the polar bears, each over 800 kilos of ferocity, advancing. The entire village depended on those lives, and Elias, without the light of his eyes, was the only hope against the monstrous pack and the ice that was beginning to crack. And what he would do next would challenge everything known about survival. Elias felt the weight of the silence that followed the roar, laden with expectation and despair. It wasn't just sound that guided him. The subtle vibration of the ice beneath his fur boots drew a tactile map of danger. His gloved fingers fumbled for his staff, a gift from his father, an extension of his body and soul. With each tremor, each distant crack, he reconstructed the scene, the 8 white colossi, hungry shadows moving with cunning, and the 1,000 reindeer, hearts pounding in panic, trapped in the ice and rock snare. In the village, smoke from the chimneys trembled, revealing the fear. Nari, the young weaver, clutched her shawl to her chest, her tear-filled eyes fixed on Elias's receding silhouette. "Is he really going alone?" she whispered to her grandmother Anya, who knitted ceaselessly. Anya, with the wisdom of years, merely nodded, her gaze distant, remembering trials overcome by the faith and courage of elders like Elias. The village's hope, fragile as ice, rested on the shoulders of that blind man. Elias, aware of the immense responsibility, took a deep breath of the icy air. He didn't see the white vastness, but he felt it in every fiber. The wind, his eternal companion, whispered secrets, bringing the pungent scent of the bears, the dampness of the ice about to give way, the warm breath of the reindeer. His blindness, far from being a weakness, was the lens that revealed the essence of the world. He saw the ice as a complex tapestry of fissures and fragile points, each with its own melody of danger. His first step onto the frozen lake was cautious, a test of faith and intuition. Elias leaned his body forward, staff extended, probing. The ice groaned, a deep lament, a warning interpreted. He knew he couldn't confront the bears. His strength lay in intelligence, in understanding the environment to orchestrate the elements. The distraction he planned would not be brute force, but cunning, a silent ballet between life and death, dictated by the ice and choreographed by the predators. His heart beat with a mixture of fear and unwavering determination. Fear was a reminder of human fragility before nature's immensity. Determination, however, was the inextinguishable flame of altruism, the love for his people that drove him to defy the impossible. He remembered the stories of his ancestors, of how the Yakuts survived cruel winters through unity and wisdom passed down from generation to generation. Elias was the living link in that chain, and he would not fail in his mission. With each step, the sound of the ice beneath his feet grew sharper, the vibrations more intense. He was approaching the encirclement. The scent of the bears, once distant, was now a strong, oppressive presence, mixed with the wild odor of the reindeer. The tension in the air was almost palpable, a taut rope about to snap. Elias closed his unseeing eyes, focusing on every sound, smell, vibration. He needed to find the exact spot, the perfect moment for his maneuver. The lives of 1,000 reindeer and the hope of his village depended on it. He was the silent guardian, and the ice, his battlefield. Elias, with his eyes closed, felt the world expand into sounds and sensations. The ice, once distant, now resonated with the massive presence of the bears. He distinguished the heavy drag of their paws, the snap of their claws, the hungry growl vibrating in the icy air. They were 8 voices of danger, each a distinct tremor in the ground. The 1,000 reindeer, in turn, formed a panicked mass, their hooves beating nervously, their calls muffled by the wind and fear. The lake's surface, a thin layer between life and death, groaned. Elias perceived a main fissure, a deep cut extending beneath his feet, and knew that time was a luxury he did not possess. His mind, a living archive of generations of YAKUT wisdom, worked feverishly. He remembered his grandfather's stories, who spoke of the song of the ice, beats and vibrations that could calm or alert animals, depending on the frequency. Elias raised his staff, feeling the familiar weight of the ancient wood. He would not use it as a weapon, but as an instrument, an extension of his will. He needed a sound audible to the reindeer, which would also confuse the bears, breaking their predatory focus. With deliberate movement, Elias struck his staff against the ice, not with force, but with precision. A hollow, resonant sound echoed, traveling across the frozen surface. It wasn't a threat, but a constant, almost hypnotic rhythm. He repeated the beat, creating a cadence. 1, 2, 3. The reindeer, previously agitated aimlessly, hesitated. Their ears turned towards the source of the sound. The bears, for an instant, also paused, heads tilted, curiosity overcoming hunger. In the village, Nari watched, her heart in her throat. "What is he doing?" she asked, her voice choked. Anya, beside her, pressed her lips together, eyes fixed on Elias's diminutive figure. "He is speaking to the earth, my granddaughter, to the ice and the animals." The grandmother knew that Elias was not just a blind man. He was a conduit for ancestral wisdom, a guardian who understood the language of the natural world. Hope, which had seemed frozen, began to thaw in Nari's chest, replaced by silent admiration. Elias continued his rhythm, moving slowly to the right, towards an area of the lake that his senses indicated was more stable and thicker. Each beat was a call, a promise of safety. He felt the reindeer begin to move, hesitant at first, then with more confidence following the sound. The challenge was to keep their attention while the bears recovered from their surprise. The predators, noticing the reindeer's movement, stirred again, their growls deeper and more menacing. One of the bears, the largest, a giant with yellowish fur and cunning eyes, stepped forward, breaking formation. Elias felt the intense vibration of its weight, its hunting intent. He knew he needed to intensify the distraction. With a sigh, he changed the rhythm of the beats, adding a subtle scrape with the base of his staff, imitating the sound of ice cracking more sharply, but in a controlled area, away from the reindeer. It was a sound that the bears, with their survival instinct, could not ignore. The sharp, dragging sound of the ice, amplified by Elias's staff, reverberated, sending a chill through the bears. They stopped again, ears raised, assessing the danger. The predatory instinct was momentarily replaced by self-preservation. The ice was treacherous for everyone. Elias seized the hesitation, accelerating the rhythm of the beats that guided the reindeer, directing them towards the safer path, away from the main fissure and the bears. The maneuver was underway, a ballet of sounds and intentions, where sight was unnecessary, and wisdom, the only light. Ilara felt the change in the air. The Siberian tigers, previously focused on the hunt, now emitted low growls, a mix of frustration and caution. The vibration of their heavy steps, each of the 12 felines, with their impressive 400 kilos of pure muscle and ferocity, was different, more hesitant. She saw the scene in her mind. The tigers' dark stripes camouflaged against the snow and shadows, their yellow eyes fixed on the groaning ice, a potential trap for them too. Ilara's maneuver had worked momentarily, but hunger was a powerful driver, and the tiger's cunning was legendary, difficult to deceive. The reindeer, in turn, responded to the constant rhythm of Ilara's staff. Their hooves beat in a hurried yet orderly trot, following the sound that guided them away from the main fissure. Ilara knew the route she had chosen was longer, but the ice there was thicker, a promise of safety, however precarious. Her gloved fingers tightened on the staff, feeling every tremor of the surface, every oscillation in the wind that carried the warm breath of the animals and the metallic scent of danger. In the village, the tension was almost unbearable. Nari, with her hands clasped in silent prayer, watched Ilara's diminutive figure on the icy horizon. Grandmother Anya, who had now joined her, held a small bone amulet, an inheritance from her own ancestors. "She is testing their patience," Anya murmured, her voice hoarse. "Tigers are proud. They will try to flank." Anya's wisdom was a balm to Nari's heart, but fear still persisted, a tight knot in her stomach. The entire village felt the weight of that moment, hope depending on the courage of a blind woman. Ilara perceived the change in the tigers' tactics. The sound of their movements became more diffuse, indicating they were spreading out, trying to encircle the reindeer from different sides. Two of them, the most audacious, began to move more quickly, their steps almost inaudible over the soft snow that covered parts of the ice. The vibration Ilara felt through her staff was more subtle, requiring almost painful concentration. She needed to react, and quickly. With a sigh that turned to vapor in the frozen air, Ilara changed the rhythm of her beats. Instead of a constant sound, she began to create a series of short, rapid beats, interspersed with strategic silences. It was an emergency language, a melody of urgency that the reindeer, with their keen sensitivity, would understand. At the same time, she directed these beats towards the area where the tigers were attempting to flank, creating a sound barrier, an illusion of imminent danger in that direction. The tigers, accustomed to silent hunting and stalking, were momentarily confused. Ilara's rhythmic and intermittent sound disoriented their senses, which relied as much on hearing as on sight to track their prey. A louder growl echoed, coming from one of the tigers that had approached too closely, indicating its frustration. It slammed its paw on the ice, a sound Ilara felt like distant thunder, but she did not retreat. She knew she needed to maintain the pressure, to break the predator's confidence. Ilara's mind was a whirlwind of calculations and memories. She remembered how her grandmother, also blind, used the sounds of nature to see the world, to predict storms and find paths. Ilara was doing the same, but on a much larger scale, with her village's life at stake. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she barely felt it. Her energy was entirely focused on the task, her keen hearing mapping every movement, every breath, every heartbeat on the vast and dangerous stage of ice. The reindeer, now more cohesive, quickened their pace, responding to the urgency in the staff's rhythm. Ilara felt the mass of their bodies moving, a wave of life she was guiding to safety. The tigers, though still hungry, were becoming more cautious, their hunting tactics disrupted by the unexpected interference. The battle was not one of brute force, but of intelligence and perception, and Ilara, the blind elder, was demonstrating a mastery that transcended sight. The village's hope pulsed in the rhythm of her staff, a hymn of resilience against nature's fury. Ilara felt the tiger's frustration grow, a wave of wild energy vibrating on the ice. The louder growl of one of them, an imposing male she identified by its heavier step, was a warning. He was no longer just cautious, he was irritated, and irritation could lead to recklessness or even greater cunning. She realized that the sound barrier would not hold them indefinitely. The 12 felines, each a 400-kilo hunting machine, began to regroup, not for a frontal attack, but for a pincer movement, trying to corner the 1,000 reindeer from two distinct flanks. The ice beneath them groaned with tension, and Ilara knew the breaking point was near. Her mind, sharpened by necessity, delved into ancestral memories. Her grandmother, in hunting times, recounted how the sound of a bone flute could guide herds and confuse predators, using the resonance of air and earth. Ilara had no flute, but she had her staff and the ice. With a deep breath, she changed the cadence. Instead of rhythmic beats, she began to scrape her staff in circular movements, creating a continuous, high-pitched sound, like the wind howling in a crevice. It was a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, further disorienting the tigers. In the village, Nari clasped her hands. "The sound has changed, Grandma. What does it mean?" Anya, with narrowed eyes, watched. "She is weaving a sonic illusion, my dear. She is making the ice sing a song of danger to the tigers, while guiding the reindeer with a melody of hope." The grandmother felt a shiver. That sound was the voice of YAKUT itself, a mixture of warning and promise. Ilara's figure, small and solitary, seemed to merge with the landscape, becoming part of nature's own force. The reindeer, now more confident, quickened their pace, following the sharp, continuous sound Ilara produced. They felt the urgency, but also the direction. The mass of 1,000 bodies moved like a river, bypassing the main fissure towards the farther bank, where the snow was deeper and the ice more stable. Ilara felt the vibration of their hooves, a pulse of life that propelled her. But the tigers were not easily deceived. One of the felines, the same imposing male, let out a roar of frustration and advanced not against the reindeer, but towards Ilara, as if perceiving the source of the disturbance. Its steps were heavy, yet incredibly fast, and Ilara felt the intense vibration approaching. The icy air seemed to freeze even more. She could not flee. She needed to maintain the distraction for the reindeer. With a swift movement, Ilara swung her staff, not to attack, but to strike with controlled force at a specific point on the ice, directly in front of the advancing tiger. The sound was a dry, loud crack, followed by a deep groan from the ice, a fissure that opened rapidly. It wasn't a crack, dangerous enough to swallow the tiger, but it was a clear warning, a demonstration of the lake's treacherous power. The feline stopped abruptly, its front paws slipping slightly, its yellow eyes fixed on the extending fissure. The other tigers, who were preparing for the pincer movement, also hesitated, the instinct of self-preservation overcoming hunger for an instant. Ilara felt the momentary relief, but knew it was only a truce. She needed to use this moment to accelerate the reindeer's escape. With renewed urgency, she intensified the guiding sound, directing the herd with all her wisdom and courage. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting long, distorted shadows over the ice, transforming the vast frozen plain into an epic stage. The silent battle of intelligence and survival continued, the life of an entire village hanging by a thread, and Ilara, the blind elder, was the maestro of this symphony of hope and danger. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting long, distorted shadows over the ice, transforming the vast frozen plain into an epic stage. The silent battle of intelligence and survival continued, the life of an entire village hanging by a thread, and Ilara, the blind elder, was the maestro of this symphony of hope and danger. With the crack in the ice serving as a warning to the tigers, Ilara intensified the guiding sound, her strikes on the ice firmer and faster, an urgent call to the reindeer. She felt the mass of 1,000 bodies moving with more cohesion, a river of life flowing towards the farther bank, where the snow was deeper and the ice more stable. Ilara's heart beat in sync with the reindeer's hooves, a melody of hope that contrasted with the wind's howl. With each step, the distance between the herd and safety diminished, but the bank still seemed distant. The tigers, though momentarily halted by the fright of the crack, did not remain inactive for long. Ilara felt the vibration of their movements reorganize. The imposing male, who had advanced, let out a deep growl, a sound that seemed to tear the icy air, and the other 12 felines responded. They would no longer attempt the pincer movement. Instead, they began to move in a semicircle, a more patient, yet equally lethal tactic, aiming to cut off the reindeer's escape to the bank and push them back towards the center of the lake, where the ice was thinner. A deep weariness began to weigh on Ilara. Her muscles ached, the cold seemed to penetrate her bones, and constant concentration was exhausting. For a brief instant, a pang of despair struck her. Would her wisdom be enough against the cunning and hunger of 12 such formidable predators? She tightened her grip on her staff, feeling the worn, familiar wood, and the memory of her grandmother, who had faced even harsher winters, flooded her. There was no room for doubt. Her people depended on her. In the village, Nari observed the change in the tigers' movements. "They're encircling again, Grandma, but in a different way." Her voice was a whisper of anguish. Anya, with a furrowed brow, took her granddaughter's hand. "They've learned. Tigers are clever, but Ilara is too. She will find a way." The grandmother, though worried, had an unwavering faith in the blind elder, a faith built on the history of her people's resilience. Ilara felt the change in the tiger's strategy. The semicircle was closing slowly, like an invisible net. She needed a new distraction, something that would not just scare them, but make them retreat for good. Her senses mapped the terrain. To her right, a small snowdrift accumulated against a rock formation, and beyond it, an area of ice that seemed thinner, but not cracked. A bold idea began to form in her mind. With renewed determination, Ilara changed the rhythm of her beats again. Instead of guiding the reindeer towards the farther bank, she began to direct them at a subtle angle, towards a narrower passage between the rock formation and the tiger's semicircle. At the same time, she began to scrape her staff on the ice with controlled force, creating a continuous, high-pitched sound that imitated the wind howling in a deep crevice. But this time, she directed that sound towards the thinner ice area beyond the rock formation. The tigers, hearing the phantom howl and feeling the ice's vibration, hesitated. The sound, which seemed to come from an invisible fissure, was an alert to their self-preservation instinct. The imposing male growled, but did not advance. The reindeer, in turn, responded to Ilara's new rhythm, quickening their pace through the narrow passage. Ilara knew she was risking everything, using the tiger's primal fear against themselves. The lives of 1,000 reindeer and the hope of her village depended on her ability to see the invisible and her indomitable courage. The sharp, continuous sound Ilara produced, imitating the wind's howl in a deep crevice, kept the tigers at bay, the vibration of the ice beneath their paws conveying the illusion of imminent danger. The reindeer, in turn, continued to advance, a river of life flowing through the narrow passage, guided by the blind elder. Ilara felt the urgency in each hoofbeat, hope pulsing in her own chest, but weariness began to weigh like an icy shroud. Her muscles screamed, and the cold penetrated every fiber of her being, but she could not give in. Still, the cunning of the Siberian tigers was legendary, and hunger, a relentless driver. Ilara perceived a subtle change in the ice's vibration, a sign that the predators were reorganizing, no longer in a semicircle, but in a new, more dispersed formation. The imposing male, the leader, let out a low growl, almost inaudible, but which Ilara felt as a deep tremor in the earth. He was no longer focused solely on the illusion of danger she had created. Her keen senses picked up a new intention, a change in strategy that chilled her to the bone. In the village, Nari pressed her lips together, her heart beating erratically. "Grandma, what's happening? The tigers are moving again, but it looks different. They're no longer encircling the reindeer in the same way." Anya, her eyes fixed on the distant landscape where Ilara's figure was almost imperceptible, felt a chill. "They are thinking, Nari. They are looking for a new weakness. Tigers are clever, my granddaughter. They understand the source of the disturbance. Anya's voice, though calm, carried a note of concern Nari had never heard before. The grandmother's unwavering faith seemed, for an instant, to waver. Ilara felt the icy air vibrate with a new threat. The alpha male, the most cunning and dangerous 400-kilo tiger, was no longer moving towards the herd or the thin ice area. Instead, he was moving with terrifying speed and silence, not to flank the reindeer, but to flank Ilara. He was moving to cut the blind elder off from the narrow passage, isolating her from the herd and the safe bank. It was an unexpected move. A bold gamble that revealed the predator's intelligence. The vibration of its heavy, determined steps rapidly approached from behind and to Ilara's right, a danger she had not foreseen. The sound of the ice beneath Ilara's staff, which had previously guided the reindeer, now seemed fragile, almost insignificant before the imminence of a personal attack. A pang of fear, cold and paralyzing, struck Ilara. Not for herself, but for the village, for the 1,000 reindeer that still depended on her. If she were brought down, all would be lost. With a sigh that turned to vapor in the frozen air, Ilara spun her body, staff raised, not as a weapon, but as an extension of her senses. She needed a new plan, a new distraction, and quickly. The tiger was a few meters away, and the vibration of its heavy breathing could already be felt in the air. She had to use what she had, her ancestral wisdom and the treacherous ice beneath her feet. The life of her village depended on her ability to overcome not only nature, but the cunning of a predator that now saw her as its primary prey. The life of her village depended on her ability to overcome not only nature, but the cunning of a predator that now saw her as its primary prey. Ilara spun her body, staff raised not as a weapon, but as an extension of her senses, her keen ears catching the subtle sound of snow being compacted under the tiger's massive paws. The vibration of its heavy breathing could already be felt in the air, an icy, wild breath that enveloped her. In her ears, the silence of Yakutia, which had once been a canvas for her perception, now seemed to amplify the imminent threat. She knew she could not flee, nor defend herself with brute force. Her only chance was to use intelligence, the ancestral wisdom flowing in her veins, and the treacherous ice itself as her ally. With a determination that seemed to spring from every fiber of her weary being, Ilara did not strike her staff, but dragged it with controlled and precise force over an area of ice that her feet felt was slightly thinner, right between her and the advancing tiger. The sound was not a crack, but a deep, prolonged groan, like the lament of a giant creature trapped in the ice, a resonance that spread rapidly, making the surface vibrate alarmingly. It was a sound that imitated the beginning of a catastrophic rupture, not just a superficial crack, but the promise of an imminent and comprehensive collapse. The alpha male, just a few meters away, stopped abruptly. Its heavy steps, which had been so decisive, hesitated. Ilara felt the change in the ice's vibration beneath its paws, from an aggressive advance to a tense pause. The tiger let out a low growl, not of fury, but of caution. Its instincts, sharpened by survival in such a hostile environment, warned it of a danger that transcended prey. The ice was an invisible enemy to all, and the sound Ilara produced was the voice of that enemy. In the village, Nari watched the scene with her heart in her throat. "Grandma, the tiger stopped. What did she do?" Her voice was a mixture of relief and astonishment. Anya, with tear-filled eyes, squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "She is speaking to the ice, my dear. She is making the ice scream at the tiger, warning it of the danger it cannot see." The grandmother felt the tension ease a little, but knew the battle was far from over. Faith in Ilara, however, was unwavering. The blind elder, small and fragile amidst the white immensity, seemed to grow in stature, becoming a force of nature. Ilara took advantage of the tiger's hesitation. Maintaining the continuous groaning sound, she began to move her staff in a gentle arc, directing the sound to a more distant point, as if the rupture was expanding away from her, but still in the direction of the tiger and its companions. It was a complex, sonic illusion, a dance between real and perceived danger. The other 12 tigers, who were observing the scene from afar, also felt the vibration and heard the ice's lament. They stirred, some taking a step back, their growls more uncertain. Hunger was powerful, but the fear of death on the ice was even greater. Ilara felt overwhelming weariness, but the mental image of the reindeer moving, of the village waiting, propelled her. She knew this maneuver wouldn't deter them forever, but it bought precious time. The 1,000 reindeer in turn continued to trot, their hooves responding to the subtle rhythm Ilara maintained with her other hand, a silent and constant call to safety. The narrow passage between the rock and the tiger's semicircle now seemed a path to salvation, and Ilara was the guardian of that path, her indomitable courage the only light in the icy landscape. The narrow passage between the rock and the tiger's semicircle now seemed a path to salvation, and Ilara was the guardian of that path, her indomitable courage the only light in the icy landscape. She kept her staff in a continuous, precise movement, the groaning sound of the ice echoing, a ghostly melody that refused to cease. Every fiber of her body cried out for rest, but the image of the 1,000 reindeer, their hooves beating a constant rhythm of hope, and the faces of Nari and Anya waiting in the village, were the fuel that propelled her. The cold, once a sharp pain, was now a spreading numbness, but Ilara's mind remained clear, a beacon of ancestral wisdom. The 12 tigers, though still cautious, did not retreat. Ilara felt the vibration of their heavy bodies moving in wider circles, testing the limits of the illusion she had created. The alpha male, the most cunning, let out a low growl, almost a murmur, but which Ilara felt as a deep tremor in the air. It was not a growl of fear, but of frustration and an intelligence seeking a new opening. She knew time was running out, that hunger would eventually overcome the fear of the treacherous ice. In the village, Nari rubbed her hands, her eyes fixed on Ilara's distant silhouette. "Grandma, they're moving again. It looks like they're trying to bypass the sound." Anya, with a heavy heart, nodded slowly. "Yes, my dear. They've learned that sound is a barrier, not a wall. They're looking for a way around it." The grandmother's voice was calm, but the wrinkle on her forehead revealed deep concern. She knew Ilara was at the limit of her strength, and the tiger's cunning was a force of nature in itself. Ilara felt the change in strategy. The tigers were splitting up, some moving to the left, others to the right, trying to flank the narrow passage through which the reindeer were running. It was a maneuver of patience, an attempt to exhaust her energy and her ability to maintain the illusion. She needed something more, something that would make them truly retreat, not just hesitate. Her senses mapped the terrain again. Ahead of the reindeer, the bank was closer, but there was a small snowdrift, a bank accumulated by the wind. A bold and risky idea began to form. With a sigh that turned to vapor, Ilara changed the movement of her staff. Instead of dragging, she began to strike with an irregular and strong cadence, but not on the thin ice. She directed the beats towards the more stable ice area, near the snowdrift, creating a sound that imitated the snap of dry branches breaking under pressure, a sound that, in Yakutia, signified the presence of a trap or a sudden invisible danger. At the same time, she began to guide the reindeer with her other hand, using an even faster and more urgent rhythm, directing them towards the snowdrift. The tigers, hearing the irregular and disturbing sound, stopped again, their growls becoming sharper, more uncertain. The alpha male, who was approaching from one of the flanks, hesitated, its yellow eyes likely searching for the source of the new danger. Ilara knew she was playing with the predator's primal instinct, using uncertainty as her most potent weapon. The village's hope now, depended on her ability to create an illusion so real that even Yakutia's most cunning predators would not dare to challenge it. Ilara maintained the irregular rhythm of her beats, the sound of dry branches breaking echoing over the ice, an invisible warning that paralyzed the tigers. The alpha male, its yellow eyes fixed on the snowdrift, pondered the danger. It growled low, a sound of frustration that Ilara felt vibrating in the icy air, but did not advance. The other 12 felines kept their distance, bodies tense, hunting instinct conflicting with fear. Hunger was a burning flame, but Yakutia taught that ice was a cruel master, and any sound of fragility was a respected threat. Ilara felt each staff beat reverberate in her bones. Overwhelming weariness threatening her concentration, cracked lips, constant muscle pain, but the image of the 1,000 reindeer, hooves hammering hope onto the ice, and the village, with Nari and Anya waiting, was her balm. She was the bridge between life and annihilation, and that responsibility kept her standing. The reindeer responded with mystical obedience to her invisible guide, quickening their pace, ascending the snowdrift with agility. The farther bank with deep snow and stable ice was now visible. In the village, Nari let out a trembling sigh. "They're climbing the snow, Grandma. The reindeer are almost there." Her voice was a thread of hope. Anya, her eyes fixed on Ilara's silhouette, a tiny dot on the white horizon, squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "Yes, my dear, but the tigers haven't given up. They're looking for a new weakness." The concern in Anya's voice was palpable, an echo of the tension. She knew the predator's cunning was ancient, and Ilara was fighting a battle against hunger and wild intelligence. Ilara felt the change. The tigers no longer reacted directly to the sound of breaking branches. The alpha male moved slowly to the right, bypassing the snowdrift, while 2 other felines moved to the left, trying to encircle the reindeer from behind, where Ilara's sound was less effective. They were testing the limits of her illusion, seeking a breach. It was a subtle movement, but Ilara perceived it as a tremor in the air, a change in wind pressure that only her keen senses could decipher. The danger was no longer direct, but insidious, a strategy of patience and flanking. She needed something that would completely disorient them, breaking their coordination. Her senses mapped the terrain, a small indentation in the rock behind the snowdrift, where the wind howled peculiarly. An idea of ancestral wisdom formed. With an effort that seemed to drain her last drop of energy, Ilara changed the movement of her staff. Instead of striking or dragging, she began to spin it rapidly, creating a whirlwind of air that, as it passed through the indentation, produced a sharp, whistling sound, like the lament of a wind spirit. It was not a physical danger, but an ethereal presence that the tigers, with their primal instincts, could not comprehend. The sound spread, confusing and disorienting, making the tigers stop and look around, heads tilted, trying to locate the source of that ghostly howl. It was the voice of Yakutia, singing a song of mystery and warning, an invisible barrier Ilara raised with the strength of her soul. The sound of the wind spirit, created by Ilara, continued to swirl, a disorienting vortex that kept the 12 tigers at bay. The alpha male, a 400-kilo colossus, shook its head, its yellow eyes flashing with a mixture of confusion and fury. It growled, a deep sound that seemed to question the very reality of Yakutia, but did not advance. The other felines, equally perplexed, retreated and regrouped, their heavy paws kicking up small clouds of snow. It was not a danger they could see or smell, and this made them hesitant, the instinct of self-preservation momentarily overriding relentless hunger. Ilara felt the predator's hesitation as a pause in the icy symphony. Every muscle in her body cried out for rest. Exhaustion was a thick fog trying to obscure her mind, but the inner vision of the 1,000 reindeer, now almost at the farther bank, and the image of her village, with Nari and Anya, were anchors that held her firm. She knew the illusion would not last forever. The tiger's cunning was a force to be respected, and hunger, a motor that could not be silenced for long. In the village, Nari pointed with a trembling finger. "Grandma, they're confused. The tigers don't know what to do." A fragile smile appeared on her lips, but soon faded, replaced by a wrinkle of concern. Anya, with a furrowed brow, watched the scene with renewed apprehension. "Yes, my dear, but confusion can turn into fury. They are intelligent. They are trying to understand what Ilara is doing." Anya's voice was a whisper, and her eyes, fixed on Ilara's distant figure, revealed deep concern. She saw the blind elder, small and vulnerable, facing a force of nature that few would dare to challenge, her unwavering faith tested with each new movement of the predators. Ilara felt the change. The alpha male, after a few moments of hesitation, began to move again, but not towards the whistling sound. Instead, it began to circle, its steps slower and more calculated, as if trying to map the source of the sound, not to attack it directly, but to understand its nature and find a breach. The other tigers, following their leader, began to imitate its movement, widening the circle, seeking a way to bypass the invisible barrier. They were learning, adapting with terrifying speed. A pang of despair chilled Ilara. The bank was so close, but the tigers were becoming smarter with each passing moment. She needed something that would not just disorient them, but force them to retreat, to give up the chase once and for all. Her senses mapped the terrain. The reindeer were climbing the snowdrift, the ice beneath their hooves now thicker and safer. But the area between her and the tigers was still a battlefield, a stage for the ultimate confrontation. Suddenly an idea, forged in ancestral wisdom and the experience of countless winters, ignited in her mind, brilliant as an ice crystal under the sun. The wind howled, an invisible ally that could be shaped. Ilara changed the movement of her staff. Instead of spinning, she began to strike with controlled force and an irregular rhythm, but not on the ice. She directed the beats towards the snowdrift accumulated near the rocky indentation, exactly where the wind created peculiar whirlwinds. The sound was not a groan or a hiss, but a series of dry, muffled thuds, like the sound of something large and heavy moving beneath the snow, something that shouldn't be there, a hidden and unpredictable danger. She knew that tigers, predators by nature, were cautious of the unknown, of what lay hidden beneath the icy surface. The alpha male, approaching slowly, stopped abruptly. Its keen ears caught the new sound, a mystery that YAKUT, in its silent cruelty, often kept. The other tigers also hesitated, their heads tilted, trying to decipher the hidden danger. The sound, coming from the snow, was more visceral, more primal. It was not an illusion of cracking ice nor a wind spirit, but the suggestion of an invisible creature, a buried danger that could be as lethal as hunger. Ilara felt the tension in the air, the balance of the battle tipping for a crucial instant in her favor. The 1,000 reindeer, now almost entirely on the safe bank, continued their way, guided by the silent rhythm Ilara maintained with her other hand, the hope of her village pulsing in every step, in every fiber of her exhausted, yet indomitable being. Ilara felt the tension in the air, the balance of the battle tipping for a crucial instant in her favor. The 1,000 reindeer, almost entirely on the safe bank, continued their way, guided by the silent rhythm Ilara maintained. The village's hope pulsed in her exhausted, yet indomitable being. The alpha male, yellow eyes fixed on the snowdrift, growled, a sound of uncertainty. The 12 tigers, in a tense semicircle, seemed like ice statues listening to the muffled sound. Ilara knew that hesitation was a fragile window. Hunger would soon consume fear. She needed to close it for good. With a final effort that seemed to drain her essence, Ilara plunged her staff into the snowdrift with calculated force at the rocky indentation. Simultaneously, She pushed and scraped the ice with the base of her staff, creating a deep, vibrating sound, like the grinding of rocks shifting under pressure. She used the staff to kick up a cloud of pulverized snow. The wind, her invisible accomplice, transformed it into a dense, rapid whirlwind, which seemed to emerge from the earth with contained fury. It was not just sound. It was the visual suggestion of something colossal and furious rising from the depths, a ghostly apparition that defied the predator's comprehension. The effect was immediate. The alpha male let out a roar of terror, a sound that echoed across the white vastness. The sight of snow erupting from the ground, combined with the guttural sound, simulated the eruption of a subterranean creature, a spirit of Yakutia whose danger was undeniable. Their primal instincts now betrayed them with irrational fear. The other 11 tigers turned and ran. Their massive bodies were blurs of fur and muscle in flight, disappearing into the mist of snow and ice. In the village, Nari let out a cry of joy, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma, they're fleeing! The tigers are leaving!" She hugged Anya tightly, the tension dissolving into a cry of relief. Anya, eyes brimming with gratitude, could barely speak. A tired smile lit up her wrinkled face, a beacon of hope. "She did it, Nari. Ilara did it. She spoke to the earth, to the wind, and Yakutia answered the call of her heart." Anya's faith shone brighter, a testament to her mother's indomitable strength and connection to nature. Ilara felt the air empty of the predator's presence. The silence was no longer threatening, but a balm for her weary soul. The distant sound of the reindeer's hooves, now firm on the bank, was the sweetest melody. She let her staff fall into the snow, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief, but her heart overflowing with peace and duty fulfilled. The mission was accomplished. The 1,000 reindeer were saved, and with them the life and hope of the village, which would survive the brutal winter. Ilara, the blind elder, had defied logic, proving that true vision resided in the courage of the heart, in ancestral wisdom, and in connection with the earth. She knelt, head bowed, not in defeat, but in silent reverence to Yakutia, which had tested her and protected her people. Ilara, kneeling in the snow, felt the intense cold penetrate her clothes, but the sensation was of an icy embrace, not a threat. The silence that followed the tiger's flight was almost deafening, an emptiness she filled with deep, ragged breaths. Every fiber of her body cried out for rest, her muscles stiff and sore, her mind exhausted. But above all there was a profound peace, a stillness found only after a battle fought with the soul. She brought a trembling hand to her chest, feeling her heart still pounding, but now with a rhythm of victory and relief. The reindeer were safe, the village was saved. With a soft groan, Ilara tried to stand. Her legs, once firm as pillars of ice, now trembled like reeds in the wind. She fumbled in the snow for her staff, which had fallen, and when her fingers found it, the familiarity of its texture was a comfort. Leaning on it, she slowly rose, each movement a silent torture. The biting wind seemed to whisper in her ears, no longer warnings of danger, but songs of gratitude. She turned her face towards the village, feeling the invisible warmth of the hope emanating from it. The journey back would be long and arduous, but the burden in her heart was light. In the village, Nari and Anya watched Ilara's diminutive figure on the horizon, now motionless. Nari's cry of joy had turned into an apprehensive silence. "She stopped, Grandma. Is she okay?" The girl's voice was a thread of concern. Anya, her eyes fixed, felt a wave of conflicting emotions. The relief at the tiger's flight was immense, but the image of Ilara, so small and vulnerable in the white immensity, squeezed her heart. She knew the price her mother had paid for this victory. "She is exhausted, my dear, but she is alive, and the reindeer are safe." Anya squeezed Nari's hand, tears now flowing freely, not from fear, but from overwhelming gratitude and deep love. Gradually, Ilara began to move again, one step at a time, dragging her staff through the snow. Her walk was slow, hesitant, but steady, like the flow of a frozen river that refuses to stop. The villagers, who had gathered in silence, watched her with reverence. No one dared to break the spell of that return, of that figure who had faced the fury of Yakutia and emerged victorious. When Ilara finally approached the village entrance, Anya ran to meet her, arms open. She embraced her mother with a strength that came from the soul, feeling Ilara's thin, trembling body, the scent of snow and effort. Nari joined the embrace, nestling against her grandmother, feeling the warmth of family, the security Ilara had restored. Ilara felt the warmth of the embraces, the familiar scent of her daughter and granddaughter, and a wave of emotion overwhelmed her. Tears, which the cold had prevented from falling, now streamed freely, warm and purifying. She didn't need to see their faces to feel the love, gratitude, and relief radiating from them. The villagers approached, not with applause or shouts, but with looks of respect and admiration. Some bowed, others touched her shoulder with silent reverence. Ilara was more than an elder. She was the personification of resilience, living proof that true strength lies not in muscles, but in the courage of the heart and a deep connection to the earth. Led to her yurt, Ilara sat by the fire, the warmth penetrating her aching bones. Nari and Anya cared for her, offering hot tea and nourishing soup. As her body recovered, Ilara's mind replayed the moments of danger, the razor-edged decisions. She had surrendered herself to Yakutia, trusted her senses, and the earth had responded. That brutal winter would be remembered, not just for the cruelty of cold and hunger, but for the story of a blind woman who, with her ancestral wisdom and indomitable altruism, saved her people, weaving a new legend of hope and human connection in the icy landscape. The village now breathed a sigh of relief, its future secured by Ilara's sacrifice and inner vision. The scent of birch smoke and the gentle presence of her loved ones enveloped Ilara like a warm cloak, warding off the cold that still clung stubbornly to her bones. Sitting on soft furs, she felt Nari's gentle hands massage her aching feet, while Anya applied healing herbs to her wrists and ankles, swollen from the effort. The warm, sweetened chamomile tea flowed down her throat, bringing a comforting warmth that radiated to every part of her exhausted body. She could hear the villagers' whispers outside the yurt, low, respectful voices, a chorus of relief and gratitude that filled the air. "Mother, you were so brave," Anya murmured, her voice choked with emotion as her fingers traced the lines of weariness on Ilara's wrinkled face. "We never doubted you, not for an instant." Ilara smiled, a faint smile, yet full of profound serenity. "I was not alone, my daughter. Yakutia was with me. The wind guided me, the ice spoke to me, and the earth lent me its strength." She closed her eyes, reliving every moment of that impossible journey, not with fear, but with the clarity of one who had connected to the essence of the world. The sound of the reindeer's hooves, the tigers breathing, the crack of the ice. Everything had transformed into a dangerous dance, and she, the blind maestro, had led the orchestra to victory. Nari, her eyes shining, squeezed Ilara's hand. "Grandma, you are the strongest woman I know. You saved all of us." The girl nestled beside her grandmother, seeking the warmth and security Ilara radiated, even in her fragility. Ilara caressed her granddaughter's hair, feeling its soft texture and sweet child's scent. "Strength, my dear, lies not just in muscles, but in the faith we have in each other and in the wisdom passed down to us. I am just a link in that chain, a voice that listens to what the earth has to say." She knew that the story of that winter would be told for generations, a reminder that, even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit, driven by love and altruism, can overcome the impossible. In the days that followed, Ilara recovered slowly, but her presence in the village was stronger than ever. She was not just the blind elder. She was the guardian of hope, the weaver of legends. The villagers sought her for advice, not just about the weather or hunting, but about life, about the resilience of the spirit. The 1,000 reindeer, now safe and fed, were a living testament to her sacrifice, and every animal grazing on the tundra was an echo of her courage. Ilara felt the change in the air, not just the end of the most brutal winter, but a renewal of faith and purpose in the village. Human connection, strengthened by adversity, shone brighter than the stars in Yakutia's icy sky. She had proven that true vision resides not in the eyes that see, but in the heart that feels, in the mind that understands, and in the soul that dares to love and protect. Her legend, woven in ice and wind, would be a beacon for all, a silent poem about the indomitable human capacity to find light even in the deepest darkness. The winter had been conquered, and life, in its purest and most resilient form, flourished again in the icy landscape, an eternal tribute to Ilara's vision. The winter had been conquered, and life, in its purest and most resilient form, flourished in the icy landscape, an eternal tribute to Ilara's vision. In the following months, the village not only recovered but thrived with vitality. The 1,000 reindeer bred, their calves frolicking across the tundra, symbols of restored hope. The cold persisted, but hunger was banished, replaced by the abundance and gratitude that permeated every heart. Ilara, though with the fragility of age, radiated a silent strength that inspired everyone. Her steps gained new dignity. She continued to be the elder guardian of ancestral wisdom, but now she was a living legend. The villagers sought her not for advice, but to hear her stories, to feel the calm of her presence. They saw in her proof that Yakutia, with its ferocity, could be understood and loved if one's heart was open to listen to its whispers. Nari, with the eyes of a young woman, carried her grandmother's story in every fiber of her being. She spent hours by Ilara's side, absorbing every word, every gesture, learning to read the signs of the wind and ice with a sensitivity that resembled the elders. Nari did not see Ilara's blindness as a disability, but as a lens that amplified other senses, revealing a world of details most would never perceive. The girl dreamed of being as wise and courageous as her grandmother, a bridge between her people's past and future. Anya, in turn, watched her mother with growing admiration. The fear that had consumed her during the Tigers' ordeal transformed into unwavering faith in the resilience of the human spirit. She cared for Ilara with tender devotion, ensuring her comfort, but knew that her mother's true strength came from within, from a deep connection to the earth. Anya taught Nari Ilara's lessons, perpetuating the legacy of courage and altruism. Ilara's legend transcended the village borders, spreading like Yakutia's icy wind. Travelers and hunters from other communities came to hear the story of the blind woman who had outsmarted 12 hungry tigers, saving 1,000 reindeer and, with them, the essence of life on the tundra. Her story was a reminder that true vision resided not in the eyes that see, but in the intuition that guides, the courage that drives, and the love that connects. The village, once merely a point of survival, became a beacon of hope, a testament to the human capacity to overcome the impossible. Every winter, when temperatures dropped and the wind howled, Ilara's story was told again. Warming hearts and rekindling the flame of hope, she became the personification of Yakutia, relentless, challenging, yet deeply connected to life and the wisdom the earth offered. Ilara lived many more winters, each confirming her legend. Surrounded by the love of her family and the gratitude of her people, she remained the voice of Yakutia, guardian of an ancient secret. True vision resides in the soul, and a courageous heart can move mountains of ice. Her life was a poem in snow and wind, about the indomitable human capacity to find light in darkness, a legacy that would echo for generations, inspiring all to look beyond the visible and trust in inner strength.